Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday, and welcome to today's webinar, Building a Trauma-Informed Classroom Community. My name is Karen Howard. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Mental Health America's National Office, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. A few notes before introducing our presenters. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out to registrants within 1 week, along with a copy of the slideshow. We do not offer continuing education units, but if you would like a certificate of attendance, we have a form for you to request one. We posted that link into the chat and we'll do so again. The link will also be included in the follow-up email as well to you. Last but not least, we've built in some time at the end for a question and answer session. Please post your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation and we'll go through some at the end. Feel free to make comments or share some of your knowledge about trauma-informed classrooms as well. And now I'm excited to introduce today's presenters. Emily Scahill is the Manager of Public Education and Awareness at Mental Health America. She develops digital content to support individuals seeking mental health resources. She also conducts research to inform MHA's awareness efforts, including Toolkits for Mental Health Month, Bebe Moore Campbell National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, also known as BIPOC Mental Health Month, Back to School in August, and National Family Caregivers Month in November. Her current work is heavily focused on the mental health effects of COVID-19 with an emphasis on social disconnection, adapting after trauma, and family dynamics. Emily graduated from Northeastern University with a degree in communication studies and psychology. Her lived mental health experience has made her a passionate advocate for stigma reduction, child mental health, and increased access to services. We're also joined today by Kate Scahill. Kate is a lead teacher at East Falmouth Elementary School, a public Title I school. She has 20 years of experience teaching in an inclusion classroom, developing, differentiating, and implementing curriculum. She holds a professional license in elementary education with a sheltered English immersion endorsement from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as well as a Master's of Education in Curriculum and Instruction. Kate has experience in social emotional learning, including trauma-sensitive classrooms, calmer choice, and peace builder methodologies, and uses many self-developed strategies based on her experiences with students facing social emotional disabilities, trauma, and mental health challenges. Kate strives to create a positive classroom community that establishes physical and social emotional safety for students while offering them autonomy and empowerment. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Kate has had the opportunity to teach a fully virtual, a hybrid, and fully in-person learning, and takes pride in successfully navigating the challenges that students, families, and school staff have faced during the pandemic. She has a passion for mental health awareness, outdoor learning, and anything related to science. Emily and Kate both have a wealth of information to share with you today. I will turn it over to them, who will unmute now and present their.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. I want to start with talking about our objectives for today. So we'll start with going over some of MHA's data on youth mental health trends over the last year and a half or so. We'll talk about why prioritizing student safety and well-being matters, as well as techniques that you can implement in your classroom to manage behavior, empower students, and build a strong classroom community. So I want to start with making sure we're on the same page with what we mean when talking about trauma. So trauma has a pretty broad definition. It can result from any situation or event that overwhelms the affected individual's ability to cope. So that means it's pretty subjective. Something that seems like no big deal to you could be genuinely traumatizing to me, and vice versa. And with kids and even teens, they often don't have healthy coping skills to process these situations and their feelings on their own. So slight stressors to adults can have a much more significant and longer lasting impact on youth. It can be helpful to think about big T trauma and little t trauma here. So big T trauma is what most people think of when it comes to traumatic events. Things like abuse, a big car accident, the sudden death of a parent. Little t trauma refers to events that might not be so obviously traumatic, but are still too much for the brain to process. So things like parents arguing a lot at home, struggling to connect with your peers, and a lot of the general uncertainty and upheaval and disruption of the pandemic fits into this as well. So we're not only talking about the kids with glaring trauma this year, we're talking about everyone. So what traumas are youth facing? This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but here are some of the big themes that we're seeing. With COVID-19, regardless of what families have faced over the last year and a half, all youth experienced some degree of uncertainty, fear, loss of normalcy or disruption of routine, lack of structure, reduced peer interaction, grief, loss. And again, trauma can result from anything that overwhelms someone's ability to cope. So this pandemic was beyond what kids can cope with on their own. It was beyond what a lot of adults can cope with on their own. And a lot of our youth didn't have the adult support that they needed to be able to process the experience. And I want to point out how truly disruptive this has been for youth. So children are experiencing this in a very different way than adults have. It's happening during their critical development years. There's a lot of learning about the world and socialization that they've missed out on to a large extent. And then 1 year is a lot for kids. A third grader has spent over an eighth of their life masked and locked down. That's very different than an adult where this year was 2 or 3% of our lifetimes. And then grief, not only losing loved ones, but also losing time and routines and the concept of normalcy, which plays a huge role in well-being. This is something we're seeing a lot in teens, grief over lost time. So things like missing out on their high school experience, dating, going to homecoming, all those little things that really make up childhood and youth and growing up, they feel like they've totally missed out on. And then increased rates of child abuse, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, that children were either witnessing or experiencing at home. And it's worth mentioning as well that while there were increased rates of reports of child abuse, the number of emergency department visits for child abuse and neglect cases actually decreased during COVID. But the severity of cases brought in was worse. And so this is coming from a CDC report. And their conclusion here was that the pandemic impacted healthcare seeking patterns for abuse and neglect, and raises concerns that victims may have not been receiving care during these times and that the severity of injuries remained stable or worsened compared to pre-pandemic times. And then increased rates of substance use in the home, which can be associated with increased violence, neglect, worry or fear when a loved one isn't acting like they usually do. And then also talk about racial injustice. So in the US, BIPOC students are vulnerable to racial trauma simply from living under a system of white supremacy. And that's no different than any other year. That's not new. But we have seen race-based discrimination and violence be a lot more prominent in media coverage, which can be triggering, can be re-traumatizing for students with marginalized identities, as well as generally confusing and scary for all children. And then of course, school fears. So things like bullying, exclusion, anxieties about their intelligence or fitting in. And then also seeing a lot of separation anxiety. So after having spent more time at home recently, or if they saw less of their parents during the pandemic due to essential work and fear that suddenly happening again. So our data comes from MHA's online screening program, which is a collection of 10 anonymous, free, confidential, and clinically validated screening tools. These are the same exact tools commonly used by healthcare providers in doctors' offices to test for mental health conditions. And we put them online because we know that when people first start experiencing mental health problems, they turn to the internet for answers. So now when they Google to find help for the mental health symptoms they're experiencing, they can take a screen and receive immediate results as well as resources and supports online. Since we launched this program in 2014, over 10 million people have completed a screen, which makes this the largest data set ever collected from a help-seeking population for mental health conditions. And the really neat thing about this, in my opinion, is that we can see these changes in real time. We've been able to track trends and evaluate in the moment how COVID and other current events may be impacting mental health. And what have we gleaned from this? The pandemic has taken a toll on everyone's mental health, but youth are a demographic of serious concern. Youth ages 11 to 17 were more likely than any other age group to score for moderate to severe symptoms of both anxiety and depression. These numbers are pretty staggering. So we're looking at 83% of 11 to 17-year-olds who took an anxiety screen scoring for moderate to severe anxiety throughout the course of the pandemic. And same time frame, over 90% of that age group screening for moderate to severe depression. Now, again, this is among a help-seeking population. So this is not to say that 90% of youth are experiencing depression, but it does tell us that these large numbers of adolescents taking screens aren't the worried well. They're not taking these out of curiosity. They come to us feeling like something isn't right. And 80–90% of the time, their screening results indicate that they are indeed really struggling with their mental health. You can see the trends over time here. I apologize the year isn't included with the months at the bottom there, but starting in January 2020 and going to June 2021, you can see on both lines, depression on the top in teal and anxiety on the bottom in navy. There's a spike in March 2020 when COVID hit. Depression rates have been fairly consistent since then at that elevated rate. Anxiety has been a bit more up and down, but overall still seeing higher rates than pre-pandemic times. And for many of our youth, these feelings are not mild by any means. This is one of the most startling statistics, I think. Over half of 11 to 17-year-olds reported having thoughts of suicide or self-harm on more than half of the previous 14 days. The pre-COVID rate on this was around 47%, and March of last year through June of this year, the average was over 51%. And unfortunately, this trend has generally continued upwards throughout that time. June 2021 was our highest percentage ever at 53.8%. And a population to really pay attention to here is our LGBTQ youth. Of these youth experiencing frequent thoughts of suicide or self-harm, over 36% of them identified as LGBTQ. Switching gears a bit to data from our youth screen. This screen is not for a specific condition like our anxiety or depression screens. The youth screen is the youth self-report version of the pediatric symptom checklist. It's clinically validated for ages 4 to 16, and it's a much more general questionnaire that is used to see if youth are having emotional, attentional, or behavioral difficulties. So it includes things like sadness, lack of interest, and so on. But I want to call attention to what are considered conduct or defiance measures, as those are more likely to be dismissed as acting out versus needing support. So these numbers are coming from youth who screened at risk on our youth screen. 58% of them are reporting that they sometimes or often have trouble with their teacher, and I broke these out here in the sometimes and often groups. 97% reporting that they sometimes or often are irritable or angry. And the breakdown of that leans heavily towards children feeling this way often versus sometimes. And then almost 69% say that they don't listen to rules sometimes or often. The majority reported this happening sometimes, but 18% said often. That's almost 1 in 5. So that's still a number of students in any given classroom that are really struggling with following directions. So what's behind all of this? In May of 2020, we added a question asking screeners what the main factors contributing to their mental health challenges were, allowed them to select up to 3 responses. You can see the options here on the left, and I'm sure no one is all that surprised to see that loneliness and isolation at the top there. That emerged very quickly as the most common factor that youth said was contributing to their mental health struggles when they took their screen. Nearly 70% of youth are selecting that as one of their top 3 contributors. Not far behind that is social life or relationships at 62%. So feeling excluded or fighting with friends, rocky relationships, etc. And then a bit over 40% of youth selected difficulties at school, and same for past trauma. So difficulties at school, that's separated out from bullying. This is specific to challenges with learning and classwork. So anxiety around this can be a bit elevated at the beginning of a new school year in the best of times. But this year especially, you can expect to see some apprehension and anxiety around schoolwork. And then we're seeing a lot of past trauma resurfacing. There's a few reasons for this. So if trauma is related to family or household issues, the lockdown period could have been very re-triggering. And more generally, when you are in that fight or flight response, like many of us have been throughout COVID, your body can't necessarily tell the difference between current trauma and past trauma. So those memories or feelings about past events can start to come back up pretty easily. This question also included an other option, and here are some of the responses submitted. We saw a lot of responses about academic pressure, being overwhelmed with work, feeling like there's no leniency or grace from teachers, from school staff, and a lot of home life stressors, as well as apathy and impulsivity. And a lot of them know that they're struggling with their mental health or aren't acting like themselves, but just don't know what to do about it. And then what are we hearing from parents? By the time parents take the parent screen, which is that same pediatric symptoms checklist, 37 reported seeing conduct problems often in their children. We're seeing social anxiety all around, so feeling out of practice with socialization, body image issues, and discomfort with being perceived by other people. Younger kids, a lot of separation anxiety, which I mentioned as the world reopens. A lot got used to having parents or caregivers at home. And then a lot of that is fear-based too, even if their guardians were essential workers and not home during the pandemic, wanting to cling on to them, worried about this happening again. And then older kids and teens, isolation is really big. A lot of teens who were social butterflies or very involved in their communities turned inward during the pandemic, spent more time in their bedroom, online, and now just aren't really interested in bouncing back. So how does this play into the classroom? I'm sure many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't strictly adhere to this pyramid structure, but basic needs have to come before learning. So things like food, water, shelter, rest, that comes first. And you cannot guarantee those needs have been met for your students lately. So whether that's family financial struggles leading to hunger, or a student isn't sleeping much because they've had to take care of the baby at home, or their parents are up late fighting. Once those survival needs are met, we get into safety needs. This makes a lot of sense evolutionarily, right? If we aren't safe, or even if we are safe but don't feel safe, that's all we can give energy to. Our brains won't go beyond that until we do feel safe. And trauma isn't a condition, it's an injury. It can be healed, it can be worked on. Trauma is really tough on the brain, and it's likely that students won't feel like their normal selves. And so to reverse that and work on that, the mind and body have to feel safe again. So creating a safe environment in schools and classrooms is a big factor in not only your students' healing and resiliency, but also their classroom behavior and their learning potential. At the end of the day, feeling safe and secure matters. We know that kids are especially vulnerable to the stressors they're facing because their brains are in a critical period of development. But this risk can be mitigated through caring and stable relationships with adults. It's wonderful if those adults are the child's parents or other caregivers, but unfortunately, that's not always the reality. But don't underestimate the impact that teachers, school staff, and other adults present in the child's life can have. One positive relationship can really make a world of difference in supporting a child's not only immediate well-being, but their lifelong well-being. In terms of learning potential and academic performance, we want our students to feel safe, but we also want them to learn and grow, right? Trauma can undermine a lot in terms of learning. It undermines development of language and communication skills, executive function, sense of self, which is crucial for learning and motivation, the ability to organize and remember new information, it's a big one, comprehension and engagement in learning. And then of course, school avoidance. If kids aren't showing up to school because they've been traumatized at home, at school, elsewhere, they're not going to be learning. And it matters for social emotional development as well. It's a huge part of what kids learn in school through experience. So trauma disrupts the ability to relate to others and manage emotions, which obviously plays a big role in in-class and social behaviors. It can also lead to challenges with self-regulation and self-reflection. So impulse control, stress management, and working to heal trauma and build resiliency here can help students build up those social emotional skills that they're struggling with. So obviously these play into learning as well. Poor behavior leads to reduced instructional time and sometimes, of course, suspension and expulsion. But I want to go beyond. I feel like I focused a lot on what adults and what the teacher can do. And we really are talking about a classroom community here. So part of feeling safe in the classroom is feeling safe in the environment as a whole, not just with the teacher. And again, I mentioned earlier, trauma is healable. The classroom can be a really great environment to cultivate that healing in youth. We can get the best outcomes all around, social, emotional, academic, if we start with a foundation of compassion, safety, and community in our classrooms. You're still muted.
Thank you. Yeah, right. Thank you so much. And so much of what you said is super important to think about when you're going into the school year. So as a reminder, I'm like a third grade teacher. I work in an inclusion classroom. So a lot of what I do is sort of through that lens, but a lot of these thoughts and perspectives and ideas can be applied to all age ranges. You know, as we're moving through the school year. Building a classroom community starts early and continues throughout the school year. It happens not only in the classroom, but in the hallways. It happens at lunch, during recess, while you're waiting with the kids at dismissal. And increasingly, as Emily had mentioned, we have students entering our classroom without their basic needs being met. Food insecurity, uncertainty with shelter and safety, and anxiety and depression and trauma, as we heard, on the rise, even with our youngest learners. So I know I definitely want to start this year with a focus on safety first, right? And due to the COVID pandemic, more than ever, we need to pay attention to that as we start off the school year. So physical safety and showing students how to be safe is important as you begin your school year, right? Kids are returning to a school environment often very different from the one they're used to. And with, you know, over 50% of students reporting that they're fearful of new situations, teaching the new rules and routines becomes more important than ever and helps them alleviate those fears. So by showing them how to be safe, we actually, you know, you go through the process of mask wearing. What does it look like? What does it not look like? When do we wear them? When do we not have to wear them? All of that information gives students a sense of, you know, predictability and control. We go through hand washing, what distancing looks like, what is 3 feet, what is 6 feet, do we need to do it and when? And in our building, like our bathroom procedures changed, our lunchroom procedures changed. We were eating lunch in the class now, drop off and pick up. So even those students who have been in your school before, things have changed. And to help ease their fears, you go through it, you know, do the walk them through all of the things that they used to know in a different way. And once we show them how to be safe, which, you know, takes time, repetition, reinforcement, some more repetition. And once you're feeling comfortable with that, then you're helping them feel safe. We go through our schedule every morning, right? Students who are feeling a little, you know, nervous, like the predictability of a schedule. And you can also tell them, you know, this is when we take mask breaks at such and such a time, and they can plan for that. Being consistent with your, you know, your procedures. When you come in, you do, you know, you put your things away, you go to your mailbox, you sit down, you start your morning work. Like a consistent morning routine helps keep everybody calm. And overall attitude that we're in this together this year, you know, we can do it. Set a positive tone for the school year. And once you're done sort of showing them how to be safe and helping them feel safe, then you can work on some more of the fun things about building your class community. So like I had said, building a class community starts before the kids are in the building. I send out a welcome letter in late August and give them you sort of like the hype of third grade. It's going to be such a great year. We're going to have so much fun. Here's all the ways you can get a hold of me. And that's for the parents, right? We want to start connecting with the parents too. Because as we get to in a little bit, we're going to find that they're part of the key here, right? And I start with the strong belief that relationships matter. I respect my students for what they bring to our community. Making those homeschool connections is important. And in class, we work to develop trust, feelings of value and empowerment, And even when it comes to discipline, which we all know that happens too, there's ways to handle it that are more helpful than punitive, right? They cause more positive outcomes. So let's take a closer look. Connecting with students and families. Next slide, thank you. I said we communicate early and often, and make sure to make myself available in any way that's comfortable for the family. So after I send out the get welcome letter, the first week of school, I'll send out something else like, how do you like to be contacted? And these days you can use emails, newsletters, texts, phone calls, notes. Surprisingly, I have found that so many parents and families like to be contacted by text. And they'll contact me with text a lot. And that's okay, because that's what I want, right? I had a student with some high anxiety, and because of that high anxiety, he would come in quite often upset or sad or unregulated in some manner, and mom would text me in the morning and be like, this is what happens, this is what he needs this morning, can you help out? And by getting back to her, she's not nervous because she knows I'm aware, and then I can make sure I can meet the needs of that student as they come in. I remember one time I got just this one text, coming in hot. I'm like, okay, get your act together, you got to get ready, this kid's going to need some help when he comes in. So it's helpful for me, and it makes them sort of bridge that homeschool connection in the best interest of their child, right? I like to send positive notes home to families really early on as well, right? I've already got my labels and my note cards posted out. You can send emails, you can send texts, postcards is what I do to tell of positive things their kids are doing. So whether it's, doing something kind for others or having an academic success, maybe it's just a funny story that I'm going to share, but reaching out to parents with positive information, positive scenarios helps later on if then you have some other challenging things you need to talk about with this parent. Go out of my way to make sure that I can meet up with families. So if we're doing like a Zoom get together, you invite families, everybody can come in and ask me questions. Last year we didn't do a regular meet the teacher. So this was the way we do it. I had a student, actually a couple of students, they were siblings last year, who started the year remote. And, as you can imagine, for an 8-year-old, learning remote is challenging if they don't know how to use all the technology yet. And that, in 3rd grade, they're still learning. So this family was having particular trouble, and it was causing a lot of stress, and it was, coming out as anger toward me. But what I realized pretty quickly is what they needed was some more support. So we scheduled some after school Zoom calls, it did not work. We scheduled afternoon phone calls, did not work. So finally I was just like, listen, can I come over? I'll mask up, I'm safe. Can I come over and just sit for, 40 minutes? And so I did. And, it turned into like a couple of sessions of 40 minutes where I could show the students how to navigate their Chromebooks and show mom how to help them. And it changed everything for those students and for that family, and just made us, partners for their kids going forward. So go out of your way and let them know when they can get a hold of you, right? So if they want to get a hold of me, Monday through Thursday, you can reach me from 7:30 a.m. till 10 o'clock. Friday, after school, I'm really not available, right? You got to protect your time too. And then Sundays, I'll do a check-in, later on in the day. So if they know what your schedule of availability is, they're more likely to connect with you. It's important. And I think when your families know that you're available and you value them, and the students know that there's a really strong homeschool connection, that immediately is helpful to you in the classroom when it comes to behavior. So another important part of building your community in your classroom is value and trust, right? Getting to know your students. So getting to know your students, we do those icebreakers, those dreaded icebreakers that we do as staff too, but in the classroom, they're really important, right? It can help you quickly build a community. You take the time to do that scavenger hunt, show and tell, 10 things about me. It gives you information about their interests, but it also helps you understand their fears, their strengths, their challenges, and it's an opportunity for their classmates to give them positive feedback, which can be a huge self-esteem builder for students. And it sets the tone for future class discussions too. The more you know, the better you can, interact and tailor your lessons to show that you've been listening and you value them. So one of the ones that I like to do at the beginning of the year is called 5 objects. And you may have heard this before. It's like a little brown lunch bag, and you just put in 5 objects from home that tell something about you, right? So I would set the expectations, let the students know that, as an audience member, they are going to be responsible for thinking about a compliment, a question, or a connection that they have when a student is presenting. And I would model it first. And I would, and it's simple things in the bag. So like a rock, a crayon, a book, and I would pull out a crayon and said, oh, Mrs. Scahill brought a crayon, right? What does that mean about me? What do you think that I'm trying to say with that? Oh, you like to draw, or you like the color yellow, or whatever it is. And we can have a nice conversation and get to know each other. And then when they're asking their questions, right, they've got their hands raised, and me as the speaker, I have control over who I call on to give me a compliment, a question, or make a connection. So I'll call on them and they're like, oh yeah, I love yellow too. That's so awesome. And so now I immediately have something in common with a student that I may not have known that well before. Great way to team build, taking the time. And often the students are so super proud to share what they have. And we all come away feeling a little bit better about, the community that we're in. So cultural awareness is another aspect of my classroom that I've been really working on over the last 2 years. In terms of the literature that I put into my classroom, making sure that main characters represent my diverse classroom community, and inviting in guests, whether it's by Zoom or hopefully this year in person, from our community. I live on the Cape and we are on Wampanoag land. So the Educational Outreach Center from the Wampanoag tribe is more than happy to send out representatives to show us and talk to us and teach us about some of the different things they do and enlighten us a little bit to their culture. Community members, BIPOC, and we have a great scientific community that we can pull from. So if I want to talk to a scientist, I'll look for a scientist that specifically reflects my diverse classroom community as well as having things around the classroom that are clearly geared towards saying you matter. I think letting students know that what's going on with them and in their lives is important. It's okay not to be okay, and that when we're having conversations about things that make them feel uncomfortable. And as we go on learning about each other, that we can all be more supportive. So when we're talking about empowering students, from the very first day when they come in, I let my third graders know, like, this is your classroom, right? I trust you to make decisions and be responsible for you, right? And that includes, you know, figuring out when you need to go to the bathroom and doing it and not abusing that, right? So the more trust you give them, I find they totally rise to the occasion. And we start in the first few days of school, like just me asking them, like having lots of conversations, like what makes a good classmate? And this activity we've done, but they have the Post-its, I'll pass them out and they'll, you know, what makes a good classmate? And they'll have their thoughts and they'll write them down. Everybody has, you know, a few minutes to do that. And then we'll come together as a group and we'll share, right? What makes a good classmate? Maybe that they're friendly, or that they're helpful, or that they're really smart, or that they're quiet, right? Kids know what makes a good classmate and they'll share. And then when we've got all of their thoughts together, then we'll summarize it and we'll come up with the definition of a good classmate and we'll put it up on the wall. And then we'll go back and I'll ask them, so what makes a good teacher? And then they all will have their 2 cents about what makes a good teacher. Usually it has something to do with extra recess and being really funny, which, you know, we can't all offer, but we can, you know, can do our best. You know, they want somebody who's kind. They want somebody who listens. They want somebody who values them, who does fun things. And we'll get together and we'll write a summary of what a good teacher is, and we'll put that up on the wall too. And then we'll say, okay, so we know what a good classmate is. You told me what you think a good classmate is. So this is what I want you to strive for. And you've told me what you think a good teacher is, so I'm going to strive for this too. And all year long, we're going to strive to be those good teachers, good classmates for one another. They told me what they wanted, so now it's up to me to deliver. They own it, right? And we'll do the same thing with class rules. I don't have the rules set up for them. They have to come up with the rules. And they know what good rules are. They know what they want out of school, right? So we'll do the same thing with Post-its, and we'll come up with a list of what they think are important for school rules. And they often come up with things like don't shout out, right? Don't talk when the teacher's talking. Don't run down the hallway. And then I'll try to take those rules and turn them to a little more positive talk, right? Instead of don't shout out, please raise your hand, right? Instead of don't run in the hallway, please walk in the hallway, right? And so we'll have our list of rules that they came up with. So they're a little more accountable to them, right? And they'll follow them because they're the rules that they made. I found that to be very helpful, is setting a groundwork for the way they want the classroom to be and the way they want it to run. So when it comes to, I think I missed something. Oh, yes, I want to go back if I can. I don't know if I can. Thank you. I wanted to make sure that we're giving them choice, right? Because when you give them choice, it immediately sort of gives them buy-in, right? This is what I'm choosing to do, so I'm going to do it well. And I do that through choice board activities. If I'm calling up groups for reading or whatnot, they have their choice board and they can decide whether they want to do a writing, you know, do a reading, watch a video, make a Flipgrid or whatever. And with them feeling that they have a choice, it alleviates a lot of the reluctance to get their work accomplished, right? I can offer them choices on free time. We ate lunch in the classroom last year, so I could let them choose to eat inside or outside. I just kind of have to stand in the doorway and watch both. So whenever you can give them choice, do it. it's going to help them invest more, and it's going to cut down on any discipline that might arise during independent work, right? And follow their lead. So if they express an interest in something, I'm going to let them follow it or incorporate it into their learning, right? If we're doing a unit on the ocean and they decide that they're really super excited about sharks, well, I'm going to let them do a mini project on sharks, and somebody else can choose something else if they want. I have a story when we were last year about May. I had come in on a Monday. It was a crazy Monday. I was not having a good morning, and I was doing the schedule on the board, and I think I forgot to list something. But anyway, so I was going through it. Somebody called me out on missing something, and I was like, geez, guys, you know what? I just had a really rough morning. You know, I locked myself out of my car. I couldn't get the technology up and running this morning. I've got a little bit of a headache. You just need to give me some grace. You know, did you guys ever have this happen to you? What do you do? And so it just turned into this great conversation. Oh yeah, I have a bad morning too, and this is what I do. Or, oh, I can't stand when this happens. Yeah, we get it. Don't worry, you can fix the schedule later. Had a really good conversation, right? So then it turned into other students sharing. And then it turned into one of my students saying, well, you know what my therapist says, and starts talking about how his therapist gave him a strategy to help him through when he's having a bad morning. And then another student was like, oh yeah, my therapist says this too. Do you know that therapists can't tell on you? And it just turned into this great classroom conversation about mental health. And so, you know, 40 minutes into it, and I'm like, okay, you know, we really got to get back to our lessons. I'm like, I don't want to shut this down. I value this conversation. You know, what can we do? We'll pick this up another time. And a student said, hey, can we just have mental health Mondays? I thought, what a great idea. Yes, absolutely we can. There were like 6 weeks of school left. I'm like, you know what? We'll start off every Monday just doing checks in, see where it leads to there from there. So I think if you follow students' leads, yeah, it can definitely lead to some really great places while they're feeling valued and taking ownership of their classroom. Thank you. Positive behavior. So when we're talking about discipline, which, you know, comes up every day, I really feel that going the positive behavior route and sort of preemptive strategies helps more than, you know, having to deal with it after. So there are a lot of things I use in the classroom. We have a calming center, which is a space where, you know, kids can go and there's like a little sand timer and they get 3 minutes. They can use the putty, they can do fidgets, they can do drawing. I have some like lava lamp stuff. And so they can go for their 3 minutes if they're feeling stressed, if they're feeling anxious, if they're feeling bored, if they're feeling like they can't focus or a little frustrated, they can go there, take their 3 minutes, take a break, and then get back to work. I also use Go Noodle, which are short body movement videos, as well as some yoga that they do in there. Headspace is a meditation app that we do 1 to 5 minute meditations that address everything from test taking to, you know, feeling, you know, tired to feeling stress. We've taught calmer choice strategies, which are breathing, like 5-finger breathing to calm yourself down, or hot cocoa breathing, where they blow into their hands to try to regulate their breath. Just empowering them with all of these strategies if they're feeling uneasy. We use peace builders as a whole school. So like peace builder, it's a pledge. And some of the key elements are to seek wise people. So if you're feeling, you know, not good, you're feeling bullied, you're feeling stressed, there are wise people that you can seek out. And to notice hurts, how to advocate for others, how to stick up for yourself. And if you do something wrong, how to right those wrongs. So all of these positive behavior sort of tricks and tools are something that all of the kids will be using all year long. And I find that that's super helpful to help mediate any of the major behavior things that we tend to see. And I feel that, you know, typically our students are more invested in the rules and routines because they've made them, right? And we've developed a strong relationship of care and trust. But it kind of limits the need for any formal classroom system of punishment. Punitive systems have not worked well for me in the past, you know, losing recess or flipping your card to red. It's generally made things worse. So I try to use positive reinforcement. But you know, things will come up. So I guess when they come up, it's really treating them as individuals and communicating with them. So if something happens in my classroom, I have a student who's pretty volatile, got frustrated, elevated real quickly, slammed the desk, throw the books on the floor, walk out of the classroom, slam the door. So, you know, I'm the teacher in the classroom, remain calm and have a process. So I know this student, my process with him, because we had built up that trust, was that he would just go in the hallway and then I would follow him out, sort of open the door, check on him. Are you okay? And he would say, no. And so I would say, okay, do you need a few minutes? He said, yes. Okay. So then I could hover in the doorway, sort of looking at my class, but also keeping an eye on him. What he needed was to calm down. He needed to calm down, and then he'd be able to talk it through, right? And if he weren't able to talk it through, I'm prepared to rally my team. So rallying my team or gathering my team was something that I set up way ahead of time at the beginning of the school year, right? And it would include last year's teacher, if they had a good working relationship, counselor, maybe a TA or another trusted adult, and an administrator. And the thought was, if the sort of the de-escalation was taking too long, that I could call on one of these people and ideally maybe have them take charge of my classroom while I dealt with this student. I really believe it's important for me and the student to be able to resolve this issue. If they're too elevated and they can't, then I know the counselor is going to take good care of them, and then I can follow through with that after. So for the students, I often ask if they're feeling escalated, take a break, Go for a walk, get a drink of water, go use the bathroom, go use the calming center, take a break. And once they've calmed down a little bit, would talk it through. Okay, what's going on? And we talk, they talk, and I listen, like really listen. They want me to know what's going on with them, right? They want to know what they're feeling. So I make sure that I'm a good listener. And then we work together to see if we can find a strategy or a solution. If so-and-so is really bothering you, do you think it would be better if we moved your desk? What do you think would work? Where do you think you should, move your desk to? How can we fix that? Okay, all right, we can move your desk. I can't do it right now. You're gonna have to hang on till the end of the day for me, and then I'll make sure we get that done, right? And if the student had an outburst, they need to right their wrongs, right? They need to find some way to either make amends or apologize or explain themselves in a way so the other person isn't left hanging. So I feel that as teachers, we have a lot on our plate this year. It takes a lot of time and effort to build that strong classroom community. But I think by taking the time to do that, it really makes sure that those kids are going to be available for learning and investing as a student in our classrooms.
Awesome. And now I want to plug some additional resources that people can go to for more information like this. Our annual Back to School Toolkit was released yesterday. Its theme this year is Facing Fears, Supporting Students. It has info sheets, worksheets, language and graphics for social media use, a lot of great content for teachers, school staff, parents on how to support students during this particularly challenging return to school, as well as content geared towards youth. So some fact sheets, guided worksheets to help them with their own mental health during this big shift. So that link right there will take you to that toolkit, as well as our past toolkits. Our 2020 toolkit was themed Coping During COVID, so that will probably be of some use as well. And then MHA screening in schools. This link here will take you to a new school-based mental health hub on our site, which talks about using screening in schools and integrating mental health education into curriculum. It also has information about how your school campus or district can join our associate membership program, which comes with some really cool benefits, but two that are really great. It has a custom screening URL and access to data analysis from our team around the use of the screening tool within your school community so that you can get a pulse on the mental health needs of the actual students that you're working with. And now we have some time for questions.
Thank you, Emily and Kate. You all did an amazing job. So many questions came in the chat about how they can access this information. So I'll just remind everyone that this was a recorded webinar, and the slides as well as the recording will be emailed out to all registrants. We also list our webinars on our website at mhanational.org/webinars. We can go ahead into question and answer. If you all have questions, please do drop them into the chat. A question that came in earlier, I have here already, Emily and Kate. Is there a distinction between external trauma that students bring into the classroom versus trauma that directly or indirectly has to do with the educational process itself, such as due to academic performance or learning differences that may or may not be recognized?
I would say the biggest difference there, so a lot of trauma looks the same. It's really hard when your body's in that fight or flight trauma response to separate between what is causing the trauma. But within the classroom, I'd say trauma around academics, so like undiagnosed learning disabilities or difficulties with teachers in past years, is more likely to show up with resistance to schoolwork. So the kids that kind of just put their head down or are constantly getting up out of their seats whenever you pass out some independent worksheet, more likely to show up that way versus external non-learning based trauma can have more of a variety of responses.
Right, and I think some of that trauma, the in-school trauma, can be dealt with a little more readily as a teacher than some of the home trauma, by putting into place ways for students to be successful early on, to sort of alleviate some of those fears, to focus on their strengths instead of their weaknesses, and to show them that it's okay to not be perfect. You're just looking for effort, and to really make those classroom connections as a safe, reliable space for them, that will help too.
You're still muted, Karen.
These are excellent points that even I've taken some notes on. Kate, I can see we have a couple of other questions that have come in, and then we'll wrap up. One person, Sheila Michaels, has asked, when two students or more are feeding off each other, reinforcing choices to disrupt or disregard rules in the classroom, how do you handle those situations?
Right. So hopefully, with all of the steps you've taken to this point, it won't get to that. But if there's a situation like that, I think what I would do was say, listen, guys, we need to have a conversation about this, right? And then I might keep them in for a few minutes when, maybe their class is off to art. I'm going to hold them back a couple of minutes, and we're going to sit down and we're going to have a conversation like, what's going on? What do you need? And how can we resolve this? And hopefully we can do that together when they don't have an audience. And when you get them in that smaller group, you can talk about, is this something that we need to follow up with at home? Is this something that, you want me to change something in this room for you? Like, what can I do to help you more? And that often helps.
Sure. I had a question about what resources are available to teachers who need additional support, or for a student who might be exhibiting behaviors. How do you refer them to support outside of the classroom when it's beyond the scope of the teacher's duties?
Right. Well, I think you try everything you can to keep it within the classroom. At least I do. I've always found when you're, sending a student to the principal in a punitive way just never works. It always makes the situation work. So I think I just build my team of resources, right? And one of my go-tos is our school adjustment counselor, right? She's a therapist. And if it's something that's, escalating to the point that I can't deal with, she has her own bag of tricks that, can help a student regulate a little bit. Once they're regulated, then we can have a conversation, or, maybe it is a safety issue that needs to go to administration. But if they go there calm versus going there escalated, it's going to turn out better.
And then one final question about supporting parents. Do you have suggestions when a child's teacher is adding to the stress of a child versus kind of helping a child resolve issues that might be coming up?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do would be to communicate clearly with that teacher. If the teacher isn't being helpful, maybe spell out what would work in the best interests of your child, right? And see if you can go that route. And if that's not working, if there's still like a real serious sort of conflict there, you might reach out to the school psychologist, the school therapist, and they can intervene. As a last resort, if you have to talk to an administrator to figure out what's going on, that's always an option. I mean, it's the best interest of your child, right? You're the biggest advocate for them. But I do find that most teachers will be receptive if they know what they can do, if you can give them some direct information or instructions to help them.
Well, I think we'll wrap up here, and this was an absolutely informative and wonderful webinar that all 300 people have dropped in the chat thank yous about. We will be in touch with everyone over the next few days with the recording, the slides, and the link to request a certificate of attendance. Thank you everyone so much for joining, and again, thank you to our speakers, Kate and Emily. We look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.